Diane, welcome to Amsterdam.
Thank you.
So you are a seasoned leadership and culture professional with experience at companies like ING, DSM, and ASML. We also know that we are living unprecedented times. In your field of expertise, leadership and culture, so many things are changing. And we decided that it would be interesting to talk about what does a modern good organization look like, and what do these changes mean for leadership and culture. And we identified at least 3 topics, right? One was that we know that the workforce is changing. So that is one topic. Another one is the whole concept of work is changing. We are moving to the hybrid world. And then as a result of these 2 things, we also know that the whole idea of how the organization works and what is the role of a culture, what is culture, is also radically probably changing. So this is what we're going to talk about today. And I was wondering, what is your take on the change from the leader's point of view, if you think about that your responsibility is to combine business interests with the interests of your employees?
Well, from the leader's point of view, it is, like we talked about before, this is the sort of extreme VUCA context, which theorists of organizations have been promising or threatening us for the last 30 years. So the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity, it's all there. And obviously this was accelerated and some aspects of it, I think, really crystallized through COVID and the post-COVID phase. But now as well, with the geopolitical complexities of doing business, together with AI rapidly increasing its impact on how work will be done, and aging, certainly in Northern Europe, an aging workforce that's not replacing itself. All these factors are coming together at once. So I think for leaders, first of all, it's an incredibly challenging time, but it's also a time that lends itself well to innovation, to experimentation with new models. And I think we're seeing some of that happening now.
You said aging workforce, but surprisingly, I think if you talk with leadership teams, that's not the main topic. They are more worried about, well, how are we able to offer to the younger generation something that these people who are entering the workforce, who kind of learned the concept of work, maybe during COVID, they would be as committed, they would be as loyal as the workforce they used to have years before. And because in your position, you see different types of segments, younger, older, also in different regions. So I think it would be interesting to start with, what are the kind of the go-to expectations of the workforce today, if you can identify them, and how they have changed.
Yeah, well, we have multiple generations in the workplace, don't we, at the moment? And all of them have different marketing names. So I'm not going to go into that because I'll probably get some of them wrong. But I think for sure there are different expectations. I'm a parent myself of now adult children, and I can see that the deal that they expect with their employer is quite different from the deal I expected when I was their age. I would say that they feel they have much more agency in the deal. Their expectations about flexibilities and remote working or taking sabbaticals are pretty high. And I think not that loyalty in the moment of being with an employer is less, but they have a much more realistic expectation of changing employer and the movement which is likely in their their sort of working life ahead. And I think well, certainly in Europe, so this is mostly my experience. In Europe, we also have a big workforce, definitely here in Holland, which has been well cared for by big companies, people who've been lucky enough to work for those with very good, healthy pension outcomes for them, a degree of stability through their working life. And now, obviously, the sort of challenge of staying in that role, in those roles, in that workplace until they are able to reach the retirement age. And I think for that group of people, the issue is more about sustainable working. How do I remain relevant in the workplace? How do I upgrade my skills? What happens if my role disappears due to whatever outsourcing technology, could be anything. And also for some employers, it's how do I get employees into my workplace here? Service sector, HoReCa, and care services. How do we get the people we need? So there are obviously lots of different experiences, but I think definitely that new generations coming into the workplace probably are expecting change. They're expecting more VUCA-ness in their experience than possibly their parents ever did.
I think it's really interesting what you say there, is that the VUCA world, the uncertainty is experienced quite differently depending on, like, whether you represent kind of the younger or the older workforce. And knowing that there are a lot of businesses which have hard times finding the right talent. Now, for instance, I learned that L'Oreal they introduced a couple of years ago a program where they focused on the kind of the learning mindset of the older generation, just to make sure that they are capable of digesting and adopting the new ways of working. And also, it's not just a matter of you adjusting to the change, but you also being interested in what's happening around you. Because we know that the older you get, the kind of easily you get a slightly narrow-minded. So I was also wondering, when it comes to organization and leadership development, but also talent development, that do you see these types of new venues emerging where you need to address very different types of needs of employee groups just to make sure that they are capable of following and embracing the change that is happening around you?
I think the biggest shift is in organizations now very much more clearly placing the responsibility, the accountability for remaining relevant with the individual, rather than, let's say, in the past where organizations might have said, right, we're going to train all of you lot on X, Y, Z, and a sort of sheep dip approach happened. And so the language that's being used is about you own your own career, you drive your own career, you have a responsibility for making sure that you are equipped with the tools, with the skills, with the knowledge, and so on. We will enable that for you. We will provide the relevant materials, the relevant courses, and so on. To me, that's interesting because I think organizations have always made available the tools and the materials that people need to learn how to be effective in their roles. Almost all big organizations have done that. But in the past it was, or in some places, a bit more like wait and see till the spoon was put in your mouth and then you would eat it. I don't think yet there is this sort of self-driven learning culture in many organizations. I think that there is still a wait and see in terms of I'll learn it when I actually need it, which is very consistent with theory of adult learning, that most adult learning takes place just in time for the application. Otherwise, don't use it, you'll lose it. So I think that is really difficult for organizations to get right, to get the balance of responsibility right there.
But I think, well, of course, like the way people or the leaders have led and people have been managed, I mean, it's fair to say that not every organization is self-organizing. Not everybody is capable of self-management because at the end of the day, they were taught to comply. They were controlled. They were taught to not to make decisions. They were more like, okay, give me the orders and I will execute. Now, interestingly, I fully agree that the idea of like, you being responsible for your work and for your career definitely is true. But it is quite a radical shift from the traditional leadership model or the philosophy which has been prevailing, like, since I don't know when. So even, there is one thing to have this new type of an expectation, but also there is a question, how do we make you to assume the new responsibility? And is it actually a responsibility of an organization, or can you leave that to the individual? What do you think about it?
Well, I think it depends ultimately how critical that competence, that skill is for the organization and when. Because we know that if it is critical, it will happen and it will happen pretty quickly and be put to use. I think it's more when it's a long-term sort of concept that you need to develop your own career. For some people, not all people, and I would say actually probably younger colleagues at work I've noticed are partly because they're beginning their career, they're hungry for movement, they're hungry for learning. They are very quick to identify the components that they need to put into place to be able to build a valid case for promotion, for example. And that might include getting qualified in certain things. You see this all the time, people like, putting on LinkedIn, I've successfully completed this online program. Many times just through their own initiative, not necessarily because it was a requirement, but it opens doors for them to new, maybe linear moves, maybe who knows what the opportunity will. But I think, maybe the combination of not being used to having to do that with the fact that you've got already a toolbox full of skills in your 40s, 50s, and maybe you don't want to move to a different division with a different skill set. And you can't see in the near horizon a risk to your relevance or viability. Maybe it's a whole collection of those factors.
But now I think that, and there is always two sides of the coin, or it takes two to tango. Now, it's obvious that the agency is placed on the employee side. But then there is a question, how does it change the role of the leader?
Yeah. Well, the leader in some ways, their role hasn't changed. They are still accountable for the performance of their team. Whatever their team is producing, the output of that team, that sits with the leader.
On the shoulders, yeah.
That's how that leader will be measured, certainly by the people above them. What it changes in is how you get that outcome. And again, you know, that depends on the team and the mix and the needs of the team. But definitely this partnership of, you know, you manage your own career. Your boss is there to enable things for you, to open doors, to sort of release resources and make that happen. It might be the resource of a program. It could be time off to upskill. Or it might just even be support, moral support for you to encourage you to get through this. But ultimately, there's still goals, there's still KPIs that people need to achieve, there's still output. And the leader needs to decide what type of leadership that team needs. And those individuals, of course, could be different. So I'm still very much a big fan of situational leadership and the need to adapt your style of leadership to the person that you're working with rather than come with your, you know, this is my modus here and that's what you're all going to get.
So instead of like, you know, have one size fits all leadership style, is almost like every employee has a user interface of their own. Yeah. And you need to know how to use each one of them.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
Okay. Now you said that, well, the responsibilities, which is to deliver business results, they are still there, but how is different. And I think this is a great bridge to talk about the hybrid or the remote work issue. Of course, like, you know, thinking it back, you see your team every day at your premises. It gives you a feeling of security, a feeling of control. And then today, I think it's an exception that if you're a knowledge worker, that you go 5 days a week to the office. And then we also see that now there are new types of, for instance, compensation models emerging, that people who rather spend time at the office as opposed to at home, they have better bonus system or they have better salaries. How do you see the question of the hybrid work when it comes to the certain privileged employee segment, which is the knowledge workers?
Yeah.
Is there a kind of a road back to the old, or the future is different than what it used to be before COVID?
Yeah, I think I don't think the old exists anymore. So I think even where some companies have mandated back to the office 5 days a week, it will be different. I think there's a different set of expectations post-COVID about work, and also technology. I think we forget how rare it was to have even a multi-party Zoom or Teams call on a regular basis. That was something which we all adapted to so quickly. It's just part of life now. So I don't think there is a back to. I think there is a decision which some companies are making based on their values. And so at the heart of this, to me, is the question of what sort of company is this? So if I'm a CEO, I believe that I want everyone back in the office 5 days a week. Why? What are my values about that? And how do I translate those values into these sorts of policies, practices, ways of working, codes of conduct, written, unwritten codes, and so on, which becomes the culture, which is the culture. And maybe in these cases, that CEO or those CEOs feel like something of their culture has been diminished by people not being present. They will feel that, and maybe that's what they're trying to recover. Whereas other organizations, certainly my experience was with organizations that very quickly adapted, and being global organizations also realized that actually some of this we have already been doing globally, and we are still one culture. So it is possible to sort of stretch in some ways. But everyone being out of the office, being fully virtual and fully working from home, remote, is not where we need to be. And so it does, to me, come back down to culture. And that culture, of course, plays itself out in the rules of the game, like I just said, but also then translated, like you said, into compensation packages, what incentives do we give for what behaviors, and then what sorts of people do we want to hire that will feel at home and be able to perform really well in this culture.
I've said it, and I think this is a sort of a radical claim, that CEOs who demand that their employees spend some time at the office, they are social, are actually doing a favor for the humanity. Because if we are looking at certain parameters which kind of communicate whether we are happy as people, whether we are healthy, there is a huge decline in certain parameters when it comes to just whether, like, I as a person, I am a well-being person. So I think it's such a hard topic, because on the one hand side, you could say that people are winning a lot, like, the ease of job, like, we don't like effort. It's easier to work at home. At the same time, the topic of isolation, not being part of, not feeling being part of something it's declining. And then it goes, and this is a long introduction, but it goes to the question, how is culture defined and what for it exists? Because we said that culture is important for the sense of belonging. Culture is important for cohesive teams. And then when we don't work together, we are sort of solo entrepreneurs. What does it mean for culture? And I think that was a question what you posed today before we started, and I think it was a fantastic question.
Yeah. Well, there is culture even if you don't intend there to be. So there is no organization that is absent of culture, because it exists between people in any group. Any group will have a dynamic. Any group will have some sort of codes and rules that will develop over time to enable it to work together effectively. And so a culture is just that. Every family has its own culture. If you ever went on a holiday with your kids and another family with their kids, you very quickly learn you have got a culture and theirs is different. So with organizations, I think, maybe the difference between families and, or some families and organization culture is the fact that this has been studied, and we know the elements that actually construct a culture. And we also know that it is possible to shift those elements. We know that if we take a systemic view, we can over time move some levers, and that will create a different culture. And the question is, can you intentionally get the culture which you need, which meets your customers, your shareholders, your users' needs, and the needs of the internal organization of the employees, of course, of the leaders. So I think the first thing about this context is, are the leaders really aware of this culture now? What do they know about it? How much do they really understand what has changed and what the effect of that is on certain groups of people? And what are they looking at and for? Because we know, for example, it's much more likely that women work from home more frequently than men.
Mm-hmm.
In certain roles, we're talking here about knowledge workers. And that's because women tend to pick up most of the caregiving responsibilities in families where that's required. And what does that do for women's opportunities within the workforce over time? May not affect people short term, but certainly it's over the longer term. There are indications, there is research that if you're not visible, we know this is an effect on talent, is visibility and just personal impact that you have on people. And that matters. You may not like it, we may not like that, but it does, because we're human. And because being together with each other influences how we feel about each other. And that translates into opportunities to work together, or, for example, the opportunity to meet a senior leader in their opinion of us and who we are and what we're capable of. So I think there is a lot on the cultural side which may not be named or examined yet. And on the cultural side, the main thing I think that leaders have focused on is productivity and, to some extent, engagement and inclusion measures as well, believing in the connection between engagement and output. And actually, there are different studies on this. You'll be aware of this as well. I heard recently that the study that shows that productivity overall in sort of service sectors could be about 10% less when people are working fully remote. But then the costs of people working fully remote are significantly less than having them in an office. We know that employers, companies very quickly took opportunities to shut down facilities, to go to, shared spaces and so on, where there actually isn't capacity for the full workforce to be back in. So companies are saving money as well. There is an opportunity there. And if that's balanced against a loss in productivity, that might somehow might even itself out. But I agree with you that in the longer term, the social impact of being on your own, on a screen, most days of the week, is socially alienating for a lot of people over time. There are some links to anxiety, which is on the rise. We know that mental health issues are much more broadly, widely reported than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And of course, you can't say this is all because of working from home, but for sure, when people are part of social groups and when people have routines and habits, there's a lot of evidence that this is good for well-being.
I would like to talk about the family you mentioned. So, because we discussed earlier today that what is important at work when the social element decreases. And we realize actually that when it comes to the everyday chaos, there are a lot of obstacles. There are a lot of derailers, and maybe the idea of making every day smooth becomes way more important. And I'm referring to a very old, something like 10 years old research from the US, where they looked into what makes work meaningful and meaningless. Mm-hmm. And they realized that people are actually pretty good at finding meaning by themselves. Mm-hmm. And companies are really great at destroying the meaning by useless processes, by bureaucracy, by things that just feel like an obstacle, everyday obstacle, as opposed to let me do my work smoothly. So I was also thinking that when culture is seen as something fluffy, maybe now the focus on making work more smooth, working on processes, improving tools, is also one way of making culture less fluffy and seen more as a hard business topic. What do you think about that?
I think everyone would say hallelujah if work was smoother, because I see it all the time and I feel it myself. I'm sure you do. That feeling when you've seen that document, it's somewhere, but what did you receive it? Was it on Teams? Was it a WhatsApp message? Was it in an email? Which email? So we all know that feeling of, I think, what people now call the overwhelm of just too much input, too much data, too much complexity in our lives. Making things smoother would help tremendously. And maybe this in the future is something which AI tooling can help us with. I think a culture where there's simplicity and where maybe a culture where actually all I need to worry about is the handoff between me and you in this moment, not where it came from, all the other 81 million stakeholders, but if we can focus on the value of these relationships where my most important collaboration or most important interdependence is, that really helps people, because it is it's a time waster. It's incredibly stressful for people. And I don't actually think in big companies we see it getting anywhere close to less than it was last year or the year before. So yeah, smooth working, that could be a great new cultural ambition.
There is a term, and that was, I read it in Harvard Business Review, and I think for once the article was not theoretical. They said that one of the greatest benefits leaders could give to their employees or workforce is to get rid of a term called addition sickness. And what you just described actually is an addition sickness. So there is every day, there is a new tool, there is a new process. And it seems like that you cannot delete, you cannot take away anything. There is just more complexity every single day. And when we started today, we said that, well, what is the future of organizations? What is the future of culture? What is culture actually when we don't spend so much time together? And I think what you said is that, well, starting with hallelujah, and then saying that maybe sort of the smoothness and simplicity is almost like the new black when it comes to building culture. How do we make the chaos less chaotic? How we reduce complexity, which is very much a business process question.
Yes.
With huge human benefits.
Potentially, yes. Yeah. And there's a great poem. I've totally forgotten the name of the poet, but he talks about when things are complex, when things are chaotic, start close in, bring everything back to the relationships around you, by what you can control, what you can touch and feel. It's almost like a mindfulness moment. And I think if, as employees, if we're able to know what that is, it's almost like the old school classic. What is your circle of influence? What can you really change? What can you really make a difference in? If I am clear about that and I feel in control of that, that's already an anchor for me. And I think that if organizations can help teams to be clear, what is the boundary of your real empowerment and ownership? Because I think this is sort of scope creep a lot on empowerment. We all say individually that we want to be empowered. And organizations say, yeah, we really want to empower all of our people, because then they'll be in this complex world. We can't possibly give one charge from the top. So we need people to be ready to, take it up, pick it up, solve their problem and move it forward themselves. That's what we say we want, organization-wide and individually. But actually, when it comes to empowerment, you can't empower me. Only I can feel empowered. And for me to feel empowered, paradoxically, I need to know what I shouldn't do and what I can't touch, and know the sort of parameters of my playing field. I think if we can help employees map the parameter of their playing field so they know that's not mine, that's the next farmer's field. And also, if I can feel competent within that field, within those parameters, to be able to take action. And actually, this comes back to hybrid working as well, because I only feel fully competent if I know the decisions I make in my field are similar to my peers in that situation. So if through some form of social learning and through standard agreements, implicit, quite often tacit learning, I know that my judgment here is a judgment that would be shared by others, given this context. And that's where I think if you learn everything, you're on your own with e-learning and you're never in problem contexts together, how can you feel empowered? Because you've got very little insight into how others react in this situation. So that would be my second thing. And the third thing is psychological safety. So if I do get it wrong, if it does mess up, has my boss got my back? Have my team got my back? So if I've got that psychological safety, the sense of competence and boundaries, I'm going to feel quite able to do my job and take some risks occasionally, which my bosses say they want me to do. So in a way, it could be that simple.
I would add one layer, and you mentioned it earlier today, which is people need a framework within which to operate. And actually, you've been already defining what is a framework. But when it comes to decision making, it goes back to the question of values. At the end of the day, values are a decision-making tool, both for leaders when it comes to making strategic choices, but also it should be an operational decision-making guidance as well. And you also mentioned that when you have very fragmented workforce, different ages, different needs, there is a question like, what brings us together, what enables us to work efficiently, even though we are not together, physically together. You also mentioned today, before we started this recording, that you kind of noticed that all these changes has actually forced companies to go back to their core values. Could you tell a little bit about that process? Because I must say that values hasn't exactly been the favorite topic of the leadership teams. And now all of a sudden you see a sort of a revitalization of values because they know that we need to give people a frame within which to operate. And also an internal guidance.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to values, one of the simplest models is the lily pond, Edgar Schein. So we've got the lily on the top of the pond is the expression of our values through our artifacts, our culture. And then the stem of the values deep down in the silt is our deeply held assumptions about the world. So what we see coming back, I think, is maybe that the assumptions never changed. Maybe the values were different for a while because, well, maybe the water was stiller and things could move in a different direction without breaking. But the deep assumptions about what is right or wrong, how the world works, who's in control here, I think we see that coming back. And maybe to employees, that gets experienced as a new set of values or maybe a seemingly different set of values. But if you think about it, maybe it's not. Maybe the assumption has always been hard work gets done in teams, you know, late nights, sort of sleeves rolled up type mentality. That's my assumption about what great work looks like. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I go. Yeah, good that you tell me that.
An assumption of what great work looks like.
Yes, yeah. So I think we all have assumptions, deeply held assumptions that we're not even aware of. We don't even know they're assumptions because we just think that's how the world is. And we all bring those into our work environment. And of course, if you're lucky enough to be at the top, then those deeply held assumptions about how the world is get expressed through the culture that you start to define for your organization, for your shop. And depending on context, the expression of those assumptions may come out differently. So the context has changed. We know that we're in a different geopolitical context now. We know that maybe it's an opportunity to be more of a strong man type of leader in this political context. That was not really acceptable socially, even 20 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, where the dominant narrative was much more around sustainability. It was about inclusion. It was about empowering employees, types of leadership models such as servant leadership and so on.
Now let's summarize. We started with the idea that as the world is changing, so there are certain fundamentals that have not changed, or certain elements of culture that actually are gaining importance, right? So we both felt very deeply about let's make work smoother. Yeah. Everyday smoothness is a great topic. Really empowering people to kind of remove the derailers so that they can make the work experience more meaningful through the smoothness, right? Then you define that, well, another element is that when the idea of agency is there, you need to really know, like, what are the boundaries within which you can operate, which is not just a job description. I mean, it's way too tactical, but it's more like, what are my responsibilities as a member of this business? And then we realize that, well, that's not the only thing. We do need also some fundamental values which are guiding our thoughts. And I actually fully agree with you. What you say there is that to really understand what the values represent is such an important topic, and actually quite much discussed topic, which is what are the fundamental drivers, the almost unwritten rules that make us work on an autopilot, and whether some of those assumptions are outdated and which ones of our assumptions are valid. And you really have to make them visible, kind of surface them. And maybe that is the new core when we say that, well, why am I here? That layer has been maybe a bit forgotten. And now with all these changes, we need to make it really visible what we stand for and what we want to achieve as a business. Yeah. So is this the future of the organization or the future of culture?
I think if we were able to have that conversation, I think dialogues with leaders in dialogue with their people, getting beneath the surface of what they say to why I say this and why I believe this. I think that in itself is a cultural intervention that leaders can lead, that will help them engage with the people who need to actually make this thing work, but also potentially open up the opportunity for, I don't want to use the word challenge necessarily, but for dialogue about these assumptions that drive our values, that turn into expressions of culture. Are they really working for all of us? Are they working for the customer, the end users, as well as for the employees? So I think, if this was possible, if this could be an opening up of an inner dialogue of how have we changed? Where are we? What is our thinking now? And why is it different? Why do we think things are changing with us as well? I think it's personal. It really is a personal thing. Then I think for leadership teams at the top, this could be a very enriching opportunity to ask themselves, is this the direction we need to go, we want to go, and we can go?
What you say might be also a solution to the very worrying trend, which is employees not trusting their leaders or the organizations they work for. So if we're looking at the most recent Edelman report, which actually also they indicated already a couple of years ago that the level of trust is actually decreasing. And now you could say that it's almost on a worrying level. But the point is that if you as an employee don't know the true motivations of your leaders, how they see the world, what is changing, what is not changing, how we need to react to those changes and why we do it, it's actually very hard to trust a person who has a power over your role, over your job, unless you understand why they do it.
Yeah, completely. And if you don't understand, then you can only make up what you think is there. So, again, just any form of open dialogue, not about what I'm saying, but about why I'm saying what I'm saying, I think gives, additional layer of insight for employees to understand who is who is my leader? And how do I feel about this? Does it chime with me? Does it fit my values too? Is this somebody I want to follow?
I think this is a perfect moment to say thank you, because those were really powerful words. So, Diane, thank you so much. It was absolutely a pleasure to have this discussion with you. Did I forget to ask anything which you think would be really important on this topic?
Not unless we've got another hour.
Another time. Another
next time. But thank
yeah.
you so much for inviting me.
It was such a pleasure. Thank
Me
you
too.
so much.
Thank you.